For 25 years, Ethan Hayes existed only in the past tense. His name appeared on faded posters still taped to a few telephone poles in suburban Dayton, Ohio. It lived in yellowed newspaper clippings folded carefully in a shoebox under his mother's bed. It was spoken in hushed tones at annual candlelight vigils, where the same handful of people gathered each August to remember the boy who disappeared on a humid Saturday in 1998. His bedroom remained untouched for the first decade, then slowly, reluctantly, became a museum of small things: a half-finished comic book on the desk, crayons scattered like confetti, a Spider-Man bedsheet that still smelled faintly of laundry detergent and childhood. His mother, Sarah, would sometimes sit on the edge of the bed and trace the worn outline of a dinosaur sticker he'd slapped on the headboard when he was 6. She never removed it. His father, Michael, kept Ethan's bicycle in the garage, tires flat, chain rusted, as though one day the boy might walk through the door and ask to ride to the park again. He never did. Everyone assumed Ethan was gone. Most people assumed he was dead. Except he wasn't. In the summer of 2023, in a small county courthouse in western Montana, a routine employment background check flagged something impossible: a Social Security number that belonged to a deceased infant from 1985, a birth date that didn't align with any legitimate record, and a name, Caleb Reed, that appeared in school transcripts but vanished from every other official database after 2010. When investigators began pulling threads, the entire tapestry began to unravel. The man sitting across from them, quiet, polite, and visibly confused, was not who he believed himself to be. His name was not Caleb Reed. His entire remembered life, the isolated ranch house, the woman who raised him, the story of an abusive father they'd fled, had been constructed on a deception so complete, so patient, that even he had come to believe it. Ethan Hayes was alive. He had been alive the whole time. He had grown up, learned to read, drawn pictures, celebrated birthdays that weren't his, made cautious friendships that never lasted long, lived an entire existence under a different name, in a different state, with a different story about who he was and where he came from. He had been missing for 25 years, but he hadn't been hiding. He had been in plain sight. And the person who took him had been beside him nearly every day, maintaining the illusion with such meticulous care that no teacher, no neighbor, no social worker, no one had ever questioned it. This is not a story of a stranger in a van. There was no Amber Alert, no grainy security footage of a masked figure, no ransom note. This is something quieter, something slower, something in many ways more disturbing, because Ethan Hayes didn't vanish into darkness. He was erased in daylight. His past was carefully dismantled and replaced with a fiction that lasted a quarter of a century. How does a child disappear while still walking among the living? How does someone grow up without knowing they were stolen? And when the truth finally surfaces, when the lie collapses and reality rushes back in, what is left of the person who lived in the space between? The story begins in the summer of 1998, in a quiet suburb of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where children still rode bikes without helmets, where screen doors slapped shut behind them, where parents left keys in the ignition and trusted that the neighborhood would keep an eye out. Ethan Hayes was 7 years old that August. He was small for his age, with dark hair that fell into his eyes no matter how many times his mother trimmed it, and a laugh that started as a giggle and ended in a hiccup. He was obsessed with drawing, superheroes mostly, but also monsters, spaceships, anything that could fly or fight or escape. He filled spiral notebooks with stories he narrated aloud while he drew, his voice rising and falling like a radio drama. He had a gap between his front teeth that made him look younger than he was, and he hated it until his best friend Tommy told him it made him look like a vampire. After that, Ethan grinned at every opportunity. His mother, Sarah, taught third grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from their house. She was 34, soft-spoken, the kind of person who kept a small notebook in her purse to jot down kind things students said so she could remember them later. She loved Ethan's imagination, even when it meant finding crayon murals on the hallway walls or action figures frozen in dramatic poses on the kitchen counter. His father, Michael, worked as a mechanic at a family-owned garage on the edge of town. He was steady, quiet, the sort of man who fixed things without needing praise. He taught Ethan how to change a tire when he was 5, how to check the oil, how to listen to an engine and know what it was trying to tell you. On weekends, they worked together in the garage, Michael explaining each tool, while Ethan listened with fierce concentration. Ethan had an older brother, Liam, 12, who was already taller, already cooler, already embarrassed by how much his little brother followed him around. Liam played basketball, listened to Nirvana on a battered Walkman, and pretended he didn't care when Ethan begged to tag along, but he always let him. When bullies at school teased Ethan about his size, Liam appeared without a word and stared them down until they left. When Ethan had nightmares, Liam would leave his door open so Ethan could come in and sleep on the floor beside his bed. They lived in a modest 2-story house on Maplewood Drive, with a front yard that Michael kept meticulously mowed, and a backyard where Sarah had planted a small vegetable garden. Ethan loved the tomatoes best. He would eat them straight off the vine, juice running down his chin, grinning like he'd discovered treasure. The neighborhood was safe in the way small-town suburbs felt safe in the late 90s. Children played street hockey until the streetlights came on. Parents waved from porches. The ice cream truck played the same tinny song every afternoon at 4. Crime was something that happened on the evening news, not on Maplewood Drive. Ethan attended summer day camp at the community center, where he spent most of his time in the art room. His favorite counselor was Miss Jenna, who never told him his drawings were silly. She called them epic. That summer, Evelyn Carter, Sarah's mother, came to stay for a week. Evelyn was 61, widowed for 4 years, thin and angular, with silver hair she wore in a neat bun, and eyes that always seemed to be looking past whatever was in front of her. Since her husband's death, she had grown quieter, more inward. She spoke less at family dinners, smiled less, spent long hours alone in her small apartment 20 minutes away. Sarah worried about her. She invited Evelyn to stay in the guest room, hoping the noise and chaos of grandchildren would bring her mother back to life. Evelyn accepted, though she never quite seemed present. She watched Ethan and Liam with an intensity that Sarah sometimes found unsettling, as though she were memorizing them. Ethan liked Grandma Evelyn enough. She brought him small gifts, colored pencils, a tiny sketchbook, a plastic dinosaur that roared when you pressed its back. She let him stay up later than his parents did, told him stories about her childhood on a farm in Indiana, about horses and haylofts and stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. On Saturday, August 15th, Evelyn offered to take Ethan to the county fair. It was a perfect summer day, hot, humid, the kind of afternoon when the air smelled of popcorn and diesel and cut grass. Sarah hesitated. She had papers to grade, Liam had basketball practice, Michael was working a half shift. But Evelyn insisted. "Let me give you a break, sweetheart. Just a few hours. We'll be back before dinner." Sarah kissed Ethan's forehead, told him to behave, to hold Grandma's hand in the crowds. He nodded, already bouncing with excitement about the Ferris wheel and cotton candy. They left at 1:47 p.m. Evelyn drove her silver 1992 Honda Civic. Ethan sat in the back, seatbelt buckled, sketchbook open on his lap, drawing a superhero who could fly through storms. They never came home. At 6:15 p.m., Sarah began calling Evelyn's cell phone. No answer. She told herself they'd stopped for ice cream, gotten caught in traffic, lost track of time. By 7, worry had turned to fear. Michael came home early. They drove to the fairgrounds together. The parking lot was emptying, rides slowing, lights dimming. No sign of the silver Honda, no sign of Ethan or Evelyn. They called the police at 7:42. 2 officers arrived at the house within 20 minutes. They took statements, asked calm, practiced questions. Had there been any arguments, any indication Evelyn might take Ethan somewhere without telling them, any reason to believe he was in danger? Sarah and Michael looked at each other across the kitchen table, the same terrible thought forming in both of them at once. Evelyn had been struggling. She had talked more than once about how the world was no place for children anymore. She had said quietly that she wished she could protect them from everything. Sarah thought it was grief talking. Surely she wouldn't. She couldn't. She was their mother, their grandmother. She loved them. This had to be a misunderstanding. Names have been changed, locations have been altered, but the truth remains. These things happened. They could happen again, and the only way to stop them is to recognize the patterns before it's too late. By 9 p.m., the house was full of people. Neighbors, friends, officers. Flashlights swept the streets. The police issued a missing child alert. Ethan's school photo, gap-toothed smile, dark hair falling into his eyes, was sent to every agency in the state. Sarah sat on the couch, clutching Ethan's favorite stuffed turtle, whispering his name like a prayer. Michael stood in the doorway, staring at the empty street, waiting for headlights that never came. The first night was agony. Every car that passed could be Evelyn returning, apologetic, confused. Every phone call could be news. But the cars kept driving, the phone stayed silent, and somewhere, on a dark highway heading west, a silver Honda Civic carried a sleeping 7-year-old boy away from everything he had ever known. He would wake up in a new state, with a new name, with a new story, and the woman beside him would tell him, gently, that this was home now, that the people he remembered were gone, that she was all he had left. And because he was 7, and because she was family, he would believe her, for a while. The police searched for weeks, then months. They dragged the river. They interviewed every carnival worker at the fair. They tracked Evelyn's credit cards, last used at a gas station 30 miles west of Dayton, cash withdrawn, no further activity. The silver Honda was found abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Indianapolis 2 weeks later, wiped clean, keys gone. No fingerprints except Ethan's on the passenger door handle, no blood, no note. The theory shifted quickly. This was a familial abduction. Evelyn had taken him. She wasn't coming back. Sarah refused to believe her mother capable of such cruelty. She's confused, she kept saying. She's grieving. She'll realize what she's done and bring him home. Michael said nothing. He had seen the look in Evelyn's eyes the last few months, distant, possessive, like she was measuring the boy against some private scale. The FBI joined on day 10. Agents interviewed Sarah and Michael separately, asking about Evelyn's mental health, her finances, her friends. They learned she had cashed out her small retirement account the month before. She had purchased a used van in cash from a private seller in Kentucky. She had told a neighbor she was going on a long trip to clear her head. They learned something else. Evelyn had miscarried a son 35 years earlier, the year before Sarah was born. The boy would have been named Daniel. He lived only 3 days. Evelyn never spoke of him, but Sarah remembered finding old hospital bracelets in a drawer once, tiny and yellowed. The agents asked if Evelyn had ever seemed overly attached to Ethan. Sarah cried. Yes, She had held him too long, rocked him when he wasn't crying, whispered to him when she thought no one was listening. The trail went cold by October. By the first Christmas, the house was silent. No tree, no presents. Sarah tried to cook a ham and burned it. Michael stared at the television without turning it on. Liam ate in his room. Sarah began calling hospitals in neighboring states. She called every day for a year. She joined online forums for parents of missing children. She learned about age progression software, about how Ethan's face would change, wider jaw, longer nose, darker brows. She printed the images and taped them to the refrigerator next to the last school photo. She never took them down. Michael returned to work, but something in him had shifted. He fixed cars mechanically, spoke less to customers. He started drinking, not heavily, just enough to sleep. He would sit in the garage at night, the door open, listening to crickets, waiting for footsteps that never came. Liam grew taller, angrier. He got into fights at school. When teachers asked what was wrong, he said nothing. When Sarah tried to talk, he walked away. He blamed himself. He had been at practice that day. He should have been home. He should have noticed something. He should have protected his brother.
The second year, the vigils began. Every August 15, a small group gathered in the park near the elementary school. Candles, photographs, a few words from Sarah, voice cracking. "We still believe." The crowd thinned each year. Neighbors who once brought casseroles stopped asking. The story became background noise, the kind of tragedy people reference in passing. Remember that little boy who disappeared with his grandmother? By 2005, 7 years gone, the case was officially cold. The FBI agents moved on. The local detective assigned to the file retired. Sarah still called once a month. The new detective was kind, but realistic. "Without new leads, Mrs. Hayes, there's not much we can do." Sarah kept searching. She learned how easy it was to disappear in 1998. No cell phones with GPS, no social media, cash transactions, homeschooling laws that varied wildly by state. A grandmother and a child raised almost no suspicion, especially if they kept moving, kept quiet, kept their heads down. She wondered, late at night, if Ethan was alive, if he was happy, if he remembered her at all. She tortured herself with the possibility that he didn't. Meanwhile, in a remote valley in western Montana, a woman named Ellen Reed lived quietly on a small parcel of land 20 miles from the nearest town. She had arrived in the fall of 1998 with a quiet boy she called Caleb, saying they had fled an abusive husband in the Midwest. The previous owner of the property, a retired rancher, sold it for cash, no questions asked. Ellen paid in full. She told the realtor she wanted privacy. The realtor, sympathetic to her story, didn't press. The house was modest. 1 story, wood siding, a sagging porch, a wood stove that kept it warm through the long winters. There was no television, no internet until many years later. Ellen homeschooled Caleb using outdated textbooks she bought at thrift stores. She taught him to read, to write, to add, to garden, to chop wood. She told him his father had been violent, that they had run in the night, that the people they left behind were dangerous, that it was better this way. Caleb believed her. He was small, dark-haired, quiet. He drew pictures, superheroes at first, then landscapes, then nothing at all. He didn't remember much before Montana. Flashes sometimes, a backyard with tomato plants, a man's rough hands showing him how to tighten a bolt, a boy older than him who smelled like gym socks and teenage sweat. Ellen said those were dreams. Children make things up. He was safe now. She loved him more than anyone ever could. She was strict but not cruel. She fed him well. She read to him at night, old storybooks about farms and animals. She never raised her voice. but she watched him constantly. She never let him out of sight for long. When he was little, she kept him on the property. When he grew older, she drove him to the library once a week, waited in the car while he chose books. No playdates, no sports, no birthday parties. She told him the world was dangerous, that people took children, that they were safer alone. Caleb accepted it. He had no other frame of reference. He celebrated his birthday on March 22nd, Ellen's choice, a date far enough from the real one to avoid overlap with any missing child alerts. He never questioned it. He grew up isolated, but not unhappy in the way children can be unhappy without knowing what they're missing. He had books, he had the sky, he had Ellen, who was always there, always watching, always telling him he was hers. By the time he was 12, the dreams came more often. A woman with soft hands and sad eyes, a garage that smelled of oil, a bicycle with training wheels he couldn't quite ride yet, a voice calling a name that wasn't Caleb. He woke crying sometimes. Ellen held him, stroked his hair, whispered that it was okay, that dreams weren't real. She changed the subject. She changed the story. She kept the illusion intact. In Ohio, Sarah turned 40. Michael's hair went gray at the temples. Liam graduated high school, moved out at 18, rarely came home. He worked construction in Columbus, sent money sometimes, called on holidays. He never mentioned Ethan. The name had become a wound too deep to touch. Sarah kept the room as it was. She dusted it. She changed the sheets. She sat there on August 15 every year and whispered, "Come home, baby. Just come home." She didn't know that 2,000 miles away, the boy she mourned was growing taller, drawing mountains instead of monsters, learning to split wood fire, learning to be quiet, learning to believe the woman who raised him was the only mother he ever had. She didn't know he was alive. She didn't know he was Caleb. She didn't know that every year, on the real date of his birth, November 12th, Ellen Reed quietly baked a small cake anyway, just for herself, lit a single candle, and whispered to the empty room, "Happy birthday, Daniel."
The foreman was kind. "Paperwork mix-up," he said. "Happens. Bring in the right one next time." Caleb went home and asked Ellen. She looked tired that day. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. "I'll handle it," she said. "Don't worry." He didn't push. But the seed was planted. The dreams had never really stopped, but they had changed. They used to be vague, colors, voices, a sense of being small. Now they were sharper. A woman laughing in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cinnamon. A man's voice saying, "Measure twice, cut once." A boy, older, angry, protective, throwing a basketball at a hoop mounted on the garage. A name that hovered just out of reach, starting with E, maybe Ethan, maybe Evan. He woke from these dreams with his heart racing, the room dark except for the faint glow of the wood stove. He would lie there listening to Ellen's soft snoring from the next room, telling himself it was nothing, just imagination. Ellen had always said his mind made things up when he was tired. But he was tired all the time now. He started reading more, library books about psychology, memory, identity. He read about childhood amnesia, how most people forget everything before age 5 or 6. He read about trauma, how the brain protects itself by burying things. He read about missing children, about families who never stopped looking. One afternoon, alone in the library while Ellen waited in the truck, he typed "Missing Boy, Ohio, 1998" into the ancient public computer. The results were sparse. A few archived news articles, a grainy photo of a 7-year-old with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile. The name, Ethan Hayes. Last seen with grandmother Evelyn Carter at a county fair. No leads. case cold. Caleb stared at the photo for a long time. The boy looked like him. Same eyes, same way the hair fell, same small, serious expression. He closed the browser and left. He didn't tell Ellen. He couldn't, but the question wouldn't leave him. Whose face was that? Whose life was that? Over the next few years, the cracks widened. At 20, he tried again, this time for a driver's license. Ellen had finally agreed to let him get one, though she insisted on coming with him to the DMV. She brought birth certificate papers, creased, slightly yellowed, stamped with what looked like an official seal. The clerk accepted them, took his photo, gave him a temporary card. The permanent card never arrived. When he called to check, the state office said there was a flag on the record, something about mismatched documentation from out of state. They needed more verification. Ellen told him it was bureaucracy. Government makes mistakes, she said. We'll fix it later. They never did. At 22, he tried to enroll in community college, online courses, something to do in the winters. The application asked for high school transcripts. Ellen produced them, handwritten, signed by Ellen Reed as homeschool administrator. The college accepted them at first. Then they asked for immunization records, then proof of residency, then a social security number that matched the one on file. Every time something failed. He began to feel like a ghost in the system, present enough to exist on the edges, but never fully inside. The dreams grew worse. He started waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain he had heard someone calling his name, not Caleb, but something else. He would walk outside, stand under the stars, and stare west toward the mountains, as though the answer might be out there. Ellen noticed his restlessness. She began to watch him more closely. She asked questions. Are you sleeping okay? Did you have another bad dream? She touched his arm too often, hold him too long when he came in from work. She spoke of our life here, of how lucky we are to be safe, of how the world outside would hurt him. He nodded, he agreed, but he was beginning to wonder. In Ohio, time had continued its slow erosion. Sarah was 54 now. Her hair had gone mostly silver. She still taught third grade, though the energy it once took to keep 25 eight-year-olds in line now exhausted her. She stopped calling the police every month. She called once a year, on August 15th, just to hear the detectives say there was nothing new. She kept Ethan's room the same. She still dusted the comics on the desk. She still changed the sheets. Michael had retired early from the garage. His knees had given out from years of kneeling on concrete. He spent most days in the backyard, tending the vegetable garden Sarah had once planted. He grew tomatoes every summer, big, red, perfect. He ate them standing at the sink, juice dripping, remembering the way Ethan used to do the same. Liam was 31. He had married a woman named Maria. They lived in Cleveland. They had a daughter, 2 years old, named Sophie. Liam brought her to Ohio twice a year. Sarah held her granddaughter and cried quietly when no one was looking. Sophie had Ethan's eyes. Liam still didn't talk about his brother, but sometimes, late at night when Maria was asleep, he would open his phone and scroll through the old photos, the ones Sarah had scanned years ago. Ethan grinning with a missing tooth, Ethan on Liam's shoulders at the park, Ethan asleep on the couch with a comic book open on his chest. Liam would stare until the screen went dark. Then he would close his eyes and try not to feel the old guilt rise again. By 2022, Caleb was 24, though he believed he was 22. Ellen had adjusted his age on the paperwork years earlier, shifting the birth year forward so the timeline would fit her story better. He had never questioned it.
But that year, he needed a passport. A rancher he worked for had offered him a seasonal job in Canada, hauling timber across the border. Good money, a chance to see something beyond Montana. The job required a passport. Ellen tried to talk him out of it. "It's dangerous up there," she said. "You don't need to go."
He insisted. She helped him fill out the application. She produced the same yellowed birth certificate. She even drove him to the post office to mail it. 3 weeks later, the rejection letter arrived. Unable to verify identity, additional documentation required, possible fraud alert issued. Caleb sat at the kitchen table and stared at the words. Ellen stood behind him, hands on his shoulders. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. But he heard something new in her voice. Fear. He looked up at her, really looked. She was 69 now, thinner. Her eyes were still sharp, but the sharpness had turned brittle. She had spent 24 years maintaining this life, this story, this boy who wasn't hers. And for the first time, Caleb saw the effort it took. He saw the strain. He saw the lie. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went outside, sat on the porch steps, and looked at the stars. He thought about the boy in the newspaper photo. He thought about the name Ethan. He thought about the woman who might be waiting somewhere, still hoping. And for the first time in 24 years, he allowed himself to wonder, what if I'm not Caleb? What if I never was? The moment came quietly, almost anticlimactically, on a crisp October morning in 2023. Caleb Reed, 24 years old by the calendar he knew, 25 by the one he didn't, had finally landed an interview at a small construction supply company in Missoula. The job was entry-level, warehouse inventory, loading trucks, basic paperwork, steady hours, health insurance, a chance to move out of the ranch house and into a rented room in town. He wanted it more than he could admit. The application process had been smoother than expected. The company used an online portal that accepted scanned documents without too much scrutiny. Ellen had helped him prepare everything again. The same faded birth certificate, the social security number she insisted was correct, a handwritten resume listing years of ranch work. He uploaded the files, clicked Submit, and waited. 2 weeks later, the human resources manager called. "We'd like you to come in for a background check and drug screen. Standard procedure. Bring your ID and social security card if you have it." Caleb drove into Missoula alone that day. Ellen had claimed a headache and stayed home. He felt a strange lightness in his chest, like the mountains were finally opening up instead of closing in. At the office, he handed over the documents. The HR woman, mid-40s, kind smile, name tag reading Karen, made copies and ran them through the system while he waited in the lobby. He sat on a plastic chair, staring at the framed company photos on the wall. Men in hard hats, trucks on dirt roads, the Montana sky wide and blue. He thought about what it would feel like to have a paycheck with his name on it, real money, real independence. Karen came back after 20 minutes. Her smile was gone. "Caleb," she said gently, "there's an issue with your social security number. It's flagged in the system. We're required to report discrepancies like this to the authorities." He felt the floor tilt. "What kind of issue?" "It's associated with an identity that doesn't match your birth date or name. We've seen this before. Sometimes it's clerical error, but we have to follow protocol. I've already contacted the county sheriff's office. They're sending someone over." He stared at her. "I don't understand." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. Just sit tight. It might be nothing." It wasn't nothing. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived within the hour. They were calm, professional, one older with a gray mustache, the younger, female, with a notepad already open. They asked him to step outside to their cruiser. In the parking lot, under a sky that had suddenly turned gray, they explained the social security number belonged to a deceased infant from Ohio, 1985. The birth certificate had inconsistencies in the seal and formatting. The name Caleb Reed appeared in some school records from a homeschool program registered in Montana in 2005, but vanished afterward. No tax records, no driver's license history, no medical history beyond a single pediatric visit in 2006. They asked basic questions. Where were you born? Who were your parents? Do you have any ID before age 7? Caleb answered honestly because he had no other answers. "I was born in Montana. My mother is Ellen Reed. I don't have baby pictures. We lived private." The younger deputy, Deputy Reyes, looked at him with something like pity. "Son, we're going to need to speak with your mother." They followed him home in the cruiser. Caleb drove Ellen's old pickup, hands shaking on the wheel. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the lights flash silently behind him. Ellen was waiting on the porch when they pulled up. She had seen the cruiser from the kitchen window. Her face was pale, but composed. The deputies introduced themselves. Ellen invited them inside. She offered coffee. They declined. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Caleb had eaten every breakfast for 25 years. The wood was scarred from years of knives and hot pans. Ellen folded her hands in her lap. The older deputy, Sergeant Harlan, opened a folder. "Ma'am, your son's documents don't check out. We've run his prints through the national database. There's a match." Ellen's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to the table. "A match to what?" "To a missing child case from Ohio, 1998. Ethan Hayes, age 7 at disappearance, taken by maternal grandmother Evelyn Carter." Silence filled the room like smoke. Caleb felt his heartbeat in his throat. "That's not possible," he said quietly. Sergeant Harlan slid a photograph across the table. It was a school picture, a 7-year-old boy with dark hair, gap-toothed smile, eyes the same shape as Caleb's, the same slight tilt to the head. Caleb stared. He recognized the face, not in the way you recognize a stranger, in the way you recognize yourself in a mirror you haven't looked into for decades. Ellen's voice came out small. "I saved him." The deputies exchanged glances. "From what?" Reyes asked. "From them, from that family. Sarah and Michael, they didn't understand him. They were too busy, too distracted. He needed someone who could really see him. I saw him. I was supposed to protect him." Caleb felt the words land like stones. "You're saying you took me?" Ellen reached for his hand. He pulled away. "You took me because you were meant to be mine," she said. "My Daniel died, and then you came, and I knew you were mine. I couldn't leave you there. They would have ruined you." Sergeant Harlan stood. "Evelyn Carter, Ellen Reed, you're under arrest for kidnapping, identity fraud, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution." They cuffed her on the porch. She didn't resist. She looked back at Caleb once, eyes wet, mouth moving as if to say something more. He couldn't hear it. The deputies took her away. Caleb stood alone in the driveway, watching the cruiser disappear down the gravel road. Then he sat on the porch steps and cried, deep, wrenching sobs that hurt his chest because he didn't know who he was crying for. Himself? Ethan? The boy in the photo? The woman who had just confessed to stealing his life? 2 days later, the FBI arrived. They interviewed him for 8 hours straight. Gentle questions, photographs, DNA swabs, age progression images that showed what Ethan Hayes might look like at 25. The match was 99.999%. They told him his real name was Ethan Hayes. His mother was Sarah Hayes, still living in Dayton, Ohio. His father was Michael Hayes. He had an older brother, Liam. They had never stopped looking. Ethan sat in the small motel room the agents had arranged. Ellen's house was now a crime scene, and stared at the wall. He felt nothing. He felt everything. He asked for a photo of Sarah. They showed him one, a woman in her mid-50s, silver hair, soft eyes, standing in a garden holding a tomato. He stared at her face for a long time. Then he asked, "Does she know?" "Yes," the agent said. "We called her this morning." In Dayton, Ohio, the phone rang at 10:47 a.m. on October 12, 2023. Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes. Michael was in the backyard picking the last tomatoes of the season. She dried her hands and answered. A woman's voice, calm, careful. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Special Agent Lauren Kim with the FBI. I need you to sit down." Sarah sat. "We've located your son. Ethan is alive. He's in Montana. He's 25 years old. He's safe." The plate Sarah had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Michael came running in from the yard. He knew her face. He knew. 25 years and 3 months after Ethan disappeared, Sarah Hayes heard the words she had stopped daring to hope for. Her son was alive. He was coming home. But the boy who stepped off the plane in Dayton 3 weeks after the phone call that shattered 25 years of grief was not the child she remembered. He was tall, quiet. His eyes were the same, but the expression in them was different, wary, distant, like someone who had learned the world could take everything from you in a single afternoon. He looked at Sarah and Michael in the airport terminal. They looked back. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah stepped forward, hands trembling. "Ethan," she whispered. He flinched at the name. Then he nodded once. "I think that's me." The first meeting happened in a small conference room at Dayton International Airport 3 weeks after the phone call that shattered 25 years of grief. The room was neutral, beige walls, a long table, a few plastic chairs, a window overlooking the tarmac where planes taxied like patient animals. 2 victim specialists waited with Sarah and Michael. A therapist named Dr. Patel sat at the end of the table, notepad closed, ready to intervene if anyone became overwhelmed. Sarah had changed clothes 3 times that morning. She finally settled on a soft green sweater Ethan used to love when he was little, the one that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. Michael wore his usual flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands clasped tight to stop them shaking. They had seen photographs. The agents had shown them current images. A tall young man with Ethan's eyes, Ethan's slight downward tilt to the mouth when thinking, Ethan's dark hair now longer and swept back. But photographs were not the same as breathing the same air. When the door opened, Ethan walked in flanked by 2 agents. He was taller than Sarah had imagined, 6'1", lean from years of ranch work. He wore a plain gray hoodie, jeans, new sneakers the agents had bought him. His duffel bag hung from one shoulder. He looked around the room slowly, carefully, like someone entering a place he had been warned might be dangerous.
Sarah stood first. She took 1 step, then stopped. "Ethan," she whispered. He flinched, just a small twitch at the shoulders, but it was enough. The name still felt foreign to him, like a word from another language. He looked at her, then at Michael, then back to the floor. "I don't know what to say," he said quietly. His voice was deeper than they remembered, of course, but there was something in the cadence, the slight hesitation before speaking, that made Sarah's knees buckle. Michael caught her elbow. Dr. Patel spoke gently. "Let's all sit. No rush. We can go at whatever pace feels right." They sat. Sarah across from Ethan, Michael beside her, the agents and therapists at the ends. Silence stretched. Sarah tried first. "We've waited so long to see you." Ethan nodded once. He stared at his hands on the table, long fingers calloused from fence posts and axe handles. "I read the file," he said. "The agents gave me everything. The news articles, the age progression pictures, your statements." He paused. "I'm sorry I don't remember you." Sarah's breath caught. "You were 7, she said. "It's okay. Children forget. Trauma makes it worse." He looked up at her then. "I remember bits, flashes, tomatoes in a garden, a garage that smelled like oil, a boy throwing a ball, but they feel like someone else's memories, not mine. Michael cleared his throat. You don't have to force anything, son. The word son landed hard. Ethan's eyes flickered. I don't know if I can be that, he said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sarah reached across the table, slowly, carefully, and placed her hand near his, not touching. We don't expect you to be the little boy we lost, she said. We just want to know who you are now. He stared at her hand. I don't know who I am now, he answered. The first hour passed in fragments. They talked about safe things, the weather in Montana, the flight, the airport coffee. Terrible. Ethan spoke little. When he did, his words were measured, as though he were afraid saying too much would break something. Sarah told him about the garden, how Michael still grew tomatoes every summer. Ethan listened, expression unreadable. Michael asked about the ranch. Quiet, Ethan said. Lots of sky. I liked the stars. They didn't mention Ellen or Evelyn. Not yet. When the hour ended, Dr. Patel suggested they stop. Ethan stood first. I need time, he said. Sarah nodded, tears standing in her eyes. Of course. He hesitated at the door. Then he looked back. I'm glad you're okay, he said. It was the closest thing to warmth he had offered. He left with the agents. Sarah cried the entire drive home. Liam arrived 2 days later. He flew in from Cleveland, left Maria and Sophie with his in-laws. He hadn't seen his parents in 6 months. He hadn't spoken Ethan's name aloud in years. He met Ethan at the same conference room. No parents this time, just the 2 brothers, the therapist, 1 agent. Liam walked in wearing a black hoodie and jeans, hair shorter than Ethan remembered, if he remembered at all. He stopped 3 feet from the table. Hey, Liam said. Ethan looked up. Hey. Liam sat. They stared at each other for a long minute. You got tall, Liam finally said. Ethan gave a small, crooked smile, the first real one anyone had seen. You too. Another silence. Liam rubbed the back of his neck. I thought you were dead. For a long time I thought maybe it was my fault. I should have been home, should have noticed something. Ethan's expression softened just a fraction. It wasn't your fault. Liam looked away. I know that now, but knowing and feeling, different. Ethan nodded. I get that. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, but something eased between them, small, tentative, real. Liam came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought photos on his phone, old ones of them as kids, Ethan riding on Liam's shoulders, Ethan asleep on the couch with a comic book open. He didn't ask Ethan to remember, he just showed them. Ethan looked at each one for a long time. Sometimes he touched the screen. Sometimes he asked questions. Who took this? Where were we? Liam answered without expectation. It was the easiest bridge they had. The house on Maplewood Drive stayed empty for the first month. Ethan was placed in temporary housing, a small apartment arranged by victim services, close enough for visits, but separate enough for breathing room. He needed distance. The thought of walking into the room that had been preserved like a shrine terrified him. Sarah understood. She visited the apartment instead, bringing food, books, a potted tomato plant she grew from seed. She never pushed. She sat on the couch while he made tea.
She told stories about his childhood without demanding he claim them. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he stared out the window. Michael came too, quiet, steady. He brought tools. They fixed a leaky faucet together one afternoon. No words needed, just hands working side by side. Ethan liked that. Ellen's trial began in spring 2024. She was charged in federal court. Kidnapping across state lines, identity fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States. She pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect. The psychiatric evaluation confirmed what the family had suspected: delusional disorder, complex trauma, identity dissociation, prolonged grief disorder for the childhood he never got to have. He learned words for the emptiness. He learned it was okay to mourn Caleb, too. He began using both names, Ethan Caleb Hayes, a hyphenation of selves. He moved into a small house on the edge of Dayton after 6 months. He got a job at a hardware store, stocking shelves, helping customers find screws and paint. He liked the smell of sawdust. He liked the routine. Sarah and Michael visited on Sundays. They ate dinner together, simple things: pasta, salad, tomatoes from the garden. Conversation stayed light. They didn't talk about the past unless Ethan brought it up. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he asked about the treehouse Michael had built. Sometimes he asked about Liam's daughter. Liam brought Sophie once. She was 4, curious, fearless. She climbed into Ethan's lap without asking. He froze. Then he let her stay. She called him Uncle E. He didn't correct her. One evening, 6 months after the reunion, Ethan stood in his childhood bedroom for the first time. Sarah had asked if he wanted to see it. He said yes. The dinosaur sticker was still on the headboard. The comics were still on the desk. He walked in slowly. He touched the bed. He sat on the edge. Sarah waited in the doorway. He looked at her. "I don't remember this room," he said. "I know. But I feel something." She nodded. "That's enough for now." He stayed for dinner that night. He didn't sleep over, but he came back the next week, and the week after that. Small steps, fractured, incomplete, but moving. By January 2026, 2 years and 3 months after the thread unraveled in Missoula parking lot, Ethan Caleb Hayes had stopped trying to choose between the two names. He carried both now, like two halves of a broken coin he refused to throw away. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of Dayton. Nothing fancy: exposed brick, second-floor windows overlooking a quiet street lined with maples. The rent was affordable on his salary from the hardware store, where he had been promoted to assistant manager 6 months earlier. He liked the work. He liked knowing where every nail, every hinge, every can of paint belonged. There was order in it, predictability, something Ellen had never been able to give him, and something the chaos of his recovered life had almost stripped away. He still went to therapy twice a week. Dr. Patel had become a steady presence, calm, never pushing, always leaving space for silence. They talked about integration now, not recovery. Integration meant accepting that Ethan and Caleb were not enemies to be defeated, but fragments to be carried forward together. Some days he felt like a mosaic, beautiful in pieces, but never quite whole. Other days he felt like a fraud wearing someone else's face. He had started a small online journal, anonymous, password protected, where he wrote about the things he couldn't say aloud, about how sometimes when he passed a tomato plant in the grocery store, he could almost taste the juice running down his chin from 30 years ago, about how the smell of motor oil still made his chest ache with something like homesickness, about how he dreamed, even now, of a ranch house under endless stars, and woke up guilty for missing it. He didn't post publicly. He wasn't ready for the world to see the cracks. Sarah and Michael had learned, slowly and painfully, to meet him where he was. Sunday dinners continued, every week, no exceptions. They ate at the kitchen table, the same one where Ethan once colored outside the lines. Sarah cooked simple things: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden. Conversation stayed light. They didn't talk about the past unless Ethan brought it up. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he asked about the treehouse Michael had built. Sometimes he asked about Liam's daughter. Liam brought Sophie once. She was 4, curious, fearless. She climbed into Ethan's lap without asking. He froze. Then he let her stay. She called him Uncle E. He didn't correct her. The hardware store's new delivery system. Ethan listened more than he spoke, but he spoke more than he had in the beginning. Sometimes he asked questions. What was I like before? Sarah answered carefully, honestly. You were curious, loud when you were excited, quiet when you were drawing. You loved stories. You trusted everyone. Ethan nodded. I don't trust easily now. I know, Sarah said, and that's okay. Michael never tried to fill the silences. He simply sat there, present. One Sunday in late 2025, Ethan brought a small wooden box he'd made in the store's workshop, rough but sturdy. Inside were 3 things: a single tomato seedling, a hammer Michael had given him when he was 5, the agents had returned it from evidence storage, and a new comic book he had drawn himself. Simple panels, a boy flying through storms, finding his way home. He placed the box on the table. For the garden, he said, and for the garage, and for me. Sarah cried quietly. Michael touched the hammer like it was a relic. They didn't hug, but they sat closer that night. Liam came more often now. He brought Sophie every other visit. She was 6, bright, fearless, full of questions. She called Ethan Uncle Ethan Caleb because she thought it sounded cool. She climbed on his shoulders the way he once climbed on Liam's. She asked him to draw superheroes with her. He did. He drew one who could fly through time, who carried 2 names and 2 homes and still found a way to land. Sophie hung it on the refrigerator. Liam watched his brother with his daughter and felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been knotted since 1998. He still carried guilt, but it weighed less. In the spring of 2025, Ethan began volunteering with a national organization for survivors of long-term abduction and identity theft. He spoke at small conferences, never on camera, never with his full name. He talked about the gaps, about how the system in 1998 had holes wide enough to drive a child through, lax homeschool regulations, easy forged documents, disconnected databases between states. He didn't blame anyone. He simply said, "We can do better." He worked with advocates to push for better interstate data sharing, mandatory background checks for homeschool registrations, and improved age progression techniques. It wasn't redemption, it was purpose. He dated cautiously. Her name was Mara, a librarian he met when he was researching trauma psychology at the public library. She was patient, quiet, with a dry sense of humor and no interest in true crime podcasts. She knew his story from the beginning. She never asked him to be anyone other than who he was on any given day. They went slow. Coffee, walks in the park, movies with subtitles because he sometimes needed quiet to process sound. One night, after a long silence on her couch, he said, "I don't know how to do this, being close to someone." Mara took his hand. "You're doing it right now." He believed her. By January 2026, the family had settled into something resembling peace. Not perfect, not restored, but real. Sarah still kept the bedroom as it was, but she no longer sat in it alone every night. She used it as a guest room now for when Liam and Sophie visited. Michael still grew tomatoes every summer. Ethan helped plant them. Liam still carried a photograph of the 4 of them, taken in 1997, in his wallet. Ethan still woke from dreams of mountains and ranch porches, but the dreams came less often, and when they did, he didn't fight them. He let them pass. He was 33 years old, chronologically correct now after court orders corrected the fabricated birth date. He had a job he liked, a girlfriend who stayed, a family who waited without demanding, a name or two that he could carry without shame. The media had long since moved on. The miracle story of 2023 faded into the background of other headlines. People in Dayton still remembered, of course. Sometimes strangers stopped him on the street to say they had prayed for him. He thanked them politely and kept walking. He no longer felt like a miracle. He felt like a survivor, which was harder and truer. On quiet evenings, he sometimes stood on his apartment balcony and looked west, toward Montana. He thought about the boy who once believed the sky was the only safe place. He thought about the boy who once believed tomatoes grew in backyards and garages smelled of home. He thought about the woman who took both boys and tried to make them one, and he forgave none of them, not Ellen, not the system, not even himself for believing the lies so completely. But he no longer hated them. Hate required too much energy. He needed that energy to keep moving forward, to keep building, to keep being. The story the world wanted was simple. Missing child found, family reunited, happy ending. The real story was more jagged. A stolen childhood that could never be returned. A fabricated life that could never be erased. A family fractured beyond full repair. But also small dinners on Sundays. A niece who climbed on his shoulders. A hammer passed from father to son, son to man. A tomato plant growing on a windowsill. A name spoken without flinching. A life carried forward, scarred and incomplete, but his. Ethan Caleb Hayes had been missing for 25 years. He had been found, and being found, it turned out, was not the end. It was the beginning of the longest, hardest part. Learning to live with what had been taken, learning to live with what remained, learning to live. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with the story. Ethan's journey reminds us that some losses are permanent, some stolen lives are never fully returned, but survival, quiet, stubborn, incremental, is a kind of triumph all its own. Names have been changed, locations altered, but the truth remains. These things happen. They could happen again, and the only way to stop them is to see the patterns, to close the gaps, and to never stop looking, even when hope feels impossible.